It's Monday, it's 12:15, and we're live in Westminster.
President Trump has changed the global conversation over the last few weeks, and it has created an opportunity. Now we must get the fundamentals right.
All the language that we're hearing about Ukraine being responsible for the war, it is a complete inversion of the truth. It's Orwellian.
European leaders, past and present, show solidarity with President Zelensky on the third anniversary of the re-invasion of Ukraine.
This US government doesn't care about Europe. My priority will be to strengthen Europe so that, step by step, we can become more independent from the United States of America.
That from the man who, after yesterday's elections, will be the next Chancellor of Germany. If he's right, how many more billions do we need to spend on defence? And could an invitation to stay at Balmoral with the King help Keir Starmer win favour with Donald Trump when he visits the White House this week? Joining us today, the Labour MP Mike Tapp, Conservative MP Sir Bernard Jenkin, the New Statesman's Rachel Cunliffe, and founder of the Conservative Home website and now a member of Reform UK, Tim Montgomery. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. We are back. MPs are returning also to Parliament today after a short break, but they are now confronting a world today that looks very different to that of just over a week ago. On this, the 3-year anniversary of Russia's re-invasion of Ukraine, let us start with a reminder of what Donald Trump has said in recent days about the war.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
Well, after that, my question to the panel. Has the world order been upended? Mike.
It's a really interesting question. We are in important days. The next week is, potentially going to set the future for the world and for the security of Ukraine and Europe. And that's why we're taking it so seriously. And what we're seeing from Keir Starmer is that true leadership on the global stage to ensure that we unite against the Russians and do everything we can to ensure that Ukraine come out of this how they want to come out of this.
Bernard, there is a new security reality?
Well, it's now very plain that there is. The writing's been on the wall for a decade or two. The isolationist sentiment of the United States has been getting stronger and stronger. Remember Obama's pivot to Asia. We had Trump in 4 years ago. He was striking a very isolationist stance. And actually, President Biden didn't actually do very much for European security. He said a lot, but did not do very much. And now we've got the wake-up call that this is now very, very plain that, as the new Chancellor in Germany just said, we've got to provide very much more for our own defence. And if Starmer's going to be effective in Washington, it's going to be presenting that to President Trump as we've got your message, we've heard you, but please, in the meantime, as we build up our defences, you can't just pull away the security guarantee that we've depended upon for the last 80 years.
Right, so you've seen signs of this change in position coming in recent years. I mean, it was a shock, but a surprise.
Putin himself in the 2000s at a Munich Security Conference. He spelled out the role of a more assertive Russia. He invaded Georgia and Abkhazia, Georgia in 2008. He took Crimea in 2014. We've had wake-up call after wake-up call, and many of us have been arguing for much higher defence spending for a very long time, and now the chickens have come home to roost.
Right, well, we will get into a proper discussion about defence spending. I mean, Rachel, what do you make of this new situation? A shock, but not a surprise?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's entirely accurate to say that the Trump White House, to call that isolationist. I think what we've seen in the very short time that Donald Trump has been in office again for his second term, that he's very happy to intervene, whether it's in the Middle East or in holding talks with Russia without Ukraine there. It's intervening with American interests sort of front and centre. And I think any world leader is going to have to look at the current geopolitical situation with a White House that is, one, very unpredictable, and two, seems to see geopolitics as a zero-sum game as a real estate deal. There will be many interventions from the Trump White House. They just may not be the interventions that we've come to expect from America over the last few decades.
Tim, you heard in our headlines there, Keir Starmer saying just this morning that President Trump had created an opportunity. Would you agree with that?
That's one way of putting it. I think the idea that Trump is sort of an isolationist, not interested in the world, is really the opposite of the truth. Again and again, he makes big decisions. He tore up the Iran deal that basically the West had signed up to before him. He stopped the sort of basic appeasement of China. We were enriching China, a country that's probably our major threat. And he was the first president that said enough is enough. And now, for years after American presidents saying Europe must spend more on defence, he really has called time. So Trump takes bold positions on foreign affairs. The position he took last week on Russia, I thought, was indefensible. But he always is not uninterested. He's not uninterested in the world. That's a misreading. He's very interested in the world. He just takes a different view on a lot of issues from conventional politicians. And we have to realise now, particularly in his second term, when he's really prepared for office, first term he wasn't, he's actually going to make good on a lot of things he only talked about in the past.
Right, well, there is a new reality insofar as he has, President Trump, brought Russia back in from the cold. America is, it seems, in retreat from Europe. And in this context, the question of leadership in Europe becomes even more crucial. And after elections in Europe's biggest economy, Germany, yesterday, Conservative Friedrich Merz will try to form a new coalition in the coming weeks after his CDU party won with 29% of the vote. The far-right AfD came second with just over 20% of the vote, but Merz has ruled out working with them. Let's talk now to our Berlin correspondent, Jess Parker. Jess, really good to have you with us. Really interesting picture, I think, in these results. I mean, just tell us about how this new political landscape in Germany looks.
Yes, it is a really interesting picture. So Conservative CDU, as you're saying, Leila, have come top. But it actually, when you look at election results that they've had in the past, isn't a particularly good one for them. However, that being said, it looks like, as things stand, they might be able to muster together a two-party coalition with the Social Democratic SPD. But if you look at the breakdown of results, given the slight rise in support from last time for the CDU, and then the AfD, the far-right AfD, nearly doubling their support, there has been a shift to the right in Germany. And this has been a campaign that has been dominated by issues that I think will sound quite familiar sometimes in the UK. The economy, the cost of living, immigration as well. And immigration, of course, a signature issue of the AfD. As you mentioned, the AfD aren't going to be in power. They're blocked from power by the so-called firewall, this policy of non-cooperation with the far right. But they will become more influential because they're potentially going to be, or probably will be, the main opposition party in the German parliament, the Bundestag.
Jess, just stay with us briefly because Friedrich Merz was speaking actually as the results were coming in and actually made it very clear immediately that he does regard this as a new era, which requires an immediate response from Europe. Let's have a listen very briefly to what he said.
I never thought I'd ever have to say this on TV, but after Trump's statements last week, it is absolutely clear that this US government doesn't care about Europe. I'm wondering, as we get close to the NATO summit at the end of June, if NATO will be in its current form or if we need to make Europe capable of its own defense more quickly. That is my top priority. And I'm absolutely clear what is happening in the USA, even most recently. How Elon Musk has been interfering in the German elections, that is unprecedented. The interferences from Washington were just as drastic, dramatic and shameful as those we've had from Moscow.
So absolutely definitive there from Friedrich Merz that Europe needs to step up, Jess. I mean, is he the man to sort of restore Germany's leadership within Europe and on the world stage?
He certainly thinks so, Leila, and he's a man known to be a pretty confident individual. Look, I think he believes that under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, there's been a lot of drift in German politics. Chancellor Scholz ran a very divided coalition government, and that Germany hasn't been present enough on the European stage, on the global stage as well. So Friedrich Merz making it very clear right away, before he's even actually become Chancellor, because coalition negotiations will take some weeks, if not longer, but making it clear this is a priority. But I think there are big questions about what that is actually going to look like. He might be a more assertive figure on the international stage than his predecessor, but Germany only recently hit the 2% NATO spending target, and even that was only because of one-off funding. They haven't come up with a sustainable plan in order to do this, and Friedrich Merz has been a little bit non-committal about the future of rising or boosting defence spending in Germany. So I think people will be waiting to see if he'll put his money where his mouth is in that regard, but he certainly is trying to signal that Germany is going to be more present in Europe on the international stage, and actually, I think, take a leading role in something that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has talked about for a long time, a more sovereign Europe, one that's less dependent on the United States.
Jess, many thanks. Jess Parker there, our Berlin correspondent, giving us the update on the German elections. Well, you heard what Friedrich Merz said immediately there. Is he right, Tim? America largely indifferent to the fate of Europe?
I don't think that's fair to say that about America. America has underpinned our defence for 70, 80 years. And they've kept waiting for Europe to step forward. And the Labour Party may be talking a good game now, but they weren't even able to match until, well, they still haven't formally done it, match a very modest increase in defence spending that the last Tory government made. Germany, after Ukraine was invaded by Russia, they talked about that was a game changer. They were going to invest hugely in defence. We've just heard that they didn't. And I think part of Trump's frustration is president after president has said to Europe, you've got to start paying more for your defence. You're almost as wealthy as we are. You're much wealthier than you were when we provided this guarantee. But Europe has kept failing. And I'm not optimistic this is going to change now, because the new government in Germany includes Scholz, the man that Merz blames partly for not delivering. So because of the nature of German democracy, we have two parties that have lost support, basically rejected by the German people, continuing to be in power. And so I'm not optimistic it's going to have the strength to take the big decisions. Right, so there are already concerns, Bernard, about the stability of this coalition. The AfD are certainly hoping that it will collapse before time. I mean, how important is German leadership here in terms of its role in Europe? How important is Germany's role?
Well, obviously Germany's role is very important as the largest economy in Europe, as the engine of the economy in the European Union. But actually, it's France and the United Kingdom that are the leading defence powers in Europe, the two nuclear weapons states. We both have our independent nuclear deterrence. And I think it's France and Britain that are going to have to partner up and help lead Germany. The danger is that Germany will, a sense of complacency will arrive again, and Germany will want to reopen its trading relationships to the east, because that's always been its traditional trading area. And the overdependence that developed under Chancellor Merkel on Russian natural gas, I mean, they were completely blinded. They laughed at Trump when he pointed this out to them. Indeed. But Europe doesn't have a choice now, because whatever security guarantee existed, President Trump has blown it up. The credibility of NATO as a deterrent organisation has been very severely compromised, and we have got to rebuild that for ourselves in Europe. I suggest we do it through NATO, because it still engages the United States, and we will still be very dependent upon a lot of United States weaponry, communications infrastructure, and the military headquarters at SHAPE in Belgium, Supreme Allied Powers headquarters in Belgium. All that is very important infrastructure. It would be a great mistake for the European Union to try and go it alone.
So Merz shouldn't give up on the US in terms of its support?
Of course we shouldn't give up, because actually there is this 80 years of history of the integration of European and American defence is a very, very strong undercurrent in Washington. To some extent, Trump is an aberration. And there are lots and lots of people in Washington, I've been speaking to my Washington contacts over the weekend, who are very, very unhappy about what Trump has done. And People are beginning to speak, Republicans are beginning to speak out against Trump in the Congress, like the chairman of the Armed Services Committee or the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. These are very influential people, and they will begin to get more confident as the Trump plan goes wrong. And the Trump plan will go wrong because there can be no stable peace in Ukraine without an American guarantee. And that is obviously not going to be forthcoming. So if there is a ceasefire, expect Ukraine to be dominated and overrun by Russian interests and continue to be threatened by Russia. If Trump wants the natural resources out of Ukraine, he'll have to put his own soldiers in to protect them.
Rachel.
Which I think he has said he has no intention of doing. So it's wanting
Exactly.
all the mineral wealth and wanting all the advantages of being the country that the world looks to in conflicts like this, without being prepared to put any of the resources there. You know, stop me if you've heard this one before. It's a very real estate developers mindset. But I think the point about European minds being focused by the commentary coming out of the White House is absolutely there. And you've got Germany, you've got France, you've got the UK thinking very seriously about how to respond to that. The fact is, whether Trump is serious about abandoning Europe and turning away from Europe or not is kind of irrelevant. If he is, Europe is going to need its own defence resources as quickly as possible. And if all of this is some kind of gambit to, get Europe to engage, and actually Trump is interested in European security, then the stronger the position of Europe, the stronger the position of European leaders, the more they can say, hey, this is what we're bringing to the table, then the more chance there is of a more constructive relationship going forward.
Right, Mike, I just want to bring this back to the result in Germany, because is there anything that we should take from the election result in Germany in terms of the rise of the AfD, populist parties again showing they have a lot of support across Europe? Keir Starmer this weekend warned of the risk of dangerous right-wing politics. Is that the right analysis here?
Well, firstly, on Donald Trump, if you don't mind, I think he's right that Europe needs to be less dependent on the United States when it comes to defence, and that's what Keir Starmer is working at now. He was in Europe just a few weeks ago talking about this. On the AfD and the right, it's really important that we don't ignore the elephant in the room there and talk about immigration, and particularly illegal migration. And that's why it's so important that Keir and Yvette are taking it so seriously in government. And not, throwing silly slogans around and plans that won't work, but instead building the Border Security Command, bringing in the security services to secure the border, putting in those bits of legislation, bringing in counter-terror law so that we can pursue the criminal gangs and treat them like terrorists. So I'm really pleased to see us doing the right thing here in the United Kingdom, and it's important we don't ignore that discontent around illegal migration.
Right, I just want to divert us very briefly, just because we have a breaking line here. We have been following the case of the former Labour MP, Mike Amesbury. He has been in court just now, handed a 10-week custodial sentence for punching a constituent in the street. He was caught on camera, if you remember, punching a man in Cheshire in October, and he was heard shouting, "You won't ever threaten the MP ever again, will you?" So Mike Amesbury has been in court this morning. He admitted attacking his 45-year-old constituent, Paul Fellows, in court last month. Today has been his sentencing, and he has received a 10-week custodial sentence. Now, this does raise the possibility of there being a recall petition now and the potential of a by-election.
That's not quite correct, because it would have to go through the Standards Committee process.
Right.
It would have to be a complaint to the Commissioner for Standards, and I served on the Standards Committee.
Yeah.
The Standards Committee would have to receive his report and decide if there had been a gross breach of the code, how long the penalty would be, what would trigger the penalty.
Surely if the man has any honour, Bernard, he'll just resign.
Is that the case with the custodial?
A custodial sentence has to be longer than, if I remember correctly, 3 months for it to trigger a by-election automatically.
Right, so it's not automatic.
This is legalistic, and it's important legalism, but why doesn't he just quit?
Quite right.
Do the right thing for once,
Yeah.
I hope the Labour Party will encourage him to go now as well.
Right. So there is a process. There's a process, but certainly the potential of a by-election down the line. Mike, should he quit?
This is the beauty of breaking news on a panel.
Oh, come on.
Well, I mean, it was in the air.
What I will say very clearly is that falls well below the standards of the Labour Party and of British values. You know, violence is always unacceptable, and I'm sure the right decision will be made in the next day or so.
Why can't you just say he should resign?
He's not a Labour MP.
He's not a Labour MP.
He was
I'm not a Labour MP, but people can see that sort of conduct.
He's not a Labour MP.
Well, should he resign as an MP? He was suspended as a Labour MP after this came to light, but should he resign as an MP?
There's no place for violence in politics.
So he should resign?
I mean, take that.
Yes.
I mean,
You've got there in the end.
Right, and of course, Reform have got their eyes on his constituency of Runcorn.
Yeah, well, it will be a big challenge for the party I now support. You know, Reform are doing very well in the opinion polls, the membership surge. But, you know, the previous iterations of Reform have struggled in by-elections because, you know, there is a real ground war advantage that the mainstream parties have, the years of experience of knowing, you know, the ground in a constituency. So it will be a challenge for Reform. But, yeah, if we are going to be the party of government, we're going to have to win contests.
I don't think it will help that the rhetoric from Reform over the last week has been quite confusing. You know, so on one hand, they're talking like Jeremy Corbyn, and then on the other, like the Reform Party. It's all very confusing to the public, I think.
I think it's an interesting seat as well because it's one where Reform came second, but by quite a long way. And one thing that we haven't seen, we haven't had the opportunity to see in by-elections so far, is the emergence of a stop Reform vote-switching sort of coalition. And I think by-elections have a real tendency to focus the mind. So if it's very clear that it's Labour or Reform in that by-election, we may well see a sort of groundswell of anti-Reform votes to try and prevent that from happening.
Yes, it was 53% Labour in the last election compared to 18%, as you said.
A long way for Reform to go.
But a real test for Reform. Just quickly, a line that I'm just seeing in regards to Mike Amesbury's sentence. He was told that he would serve only 40% of that 10-week sentence, so 4 weeks, but would spend a further 12 months on licence. Right, well, let us get back to matters a bit more global. President Macron is in Washington today for talks with Donald Trump. Keir Starmer is going to follow on Thursday for his own meeting with President Trump. Keir Starmer spoke to President Macron last night. They reiterated their desire for Ukraine to be at the centre of negotiations to end the war. Let us just remind ourselves of what President Trump has said when asked last week about Keir Starmer and Europe's approach to the war.
We have Macron coming to see you for France and then Starmer for the UK this week to move forward.
Yeah, but they didn't do anything either. The war is going on. There's no meetings with Russia, no nothing.
Right.
You know, they haven't done anything. And Macron's a friend of mine, and I've met with the prime minister, and you know, he's a very nice guy, but nobody's done anything.
Right, a very nice guy, but unimpressed with Keir Starmer's response to the Ukraine war so far. Right, I mean, is that enough, Rachel, for Keir Starmer to be a nice guy? I mean, what can he really do to sway Donald Trump in this meeting? Well,
firstly, I should say we should start by saying that what Donald Trump said that isn't true. European aid to Ukraine exceeded US aid to Ukraine, and of European countries, I think Britain has been at the forefront of leading that effort. And I know we have to deal with what the president says, but it's also, you know, worth pointing out when what he says is completely factually detached from reality, as were his other comments about Ukraine being the one to start the war. So having flagged that, I'm not sure that that is necessarily the notes that Keir Starmer should lead on when he has his meeting with the US president later this week. Trump thinks in terms of deals and in terms of wanting to look like the winner. He desperately wants a Russia-Ukraine peace deal, not, I think, because he really cares about European security, but because it'll make him look good and possibly even win the Nobel Peace Prize further down the line, which is something that we know that he wants. So I think the Prime Minister's strategy in that meeting should be to stress the ways in which a long-term, secure, sustainable peace deal that doesn't just completely walk all over one of the participants is in Trump's interest too, and to try and see this in the long term rather than just sort of a short term, can we get a deal this week and put Trump's name on it.
Right, I mean, it's a high stakes visit, isn't it? I mean, it's fraught with risks. Tim, how should he play it?
I think one thing that he should realise is he probably has the country behind him, rarely. Britain hasn't got many things right in recent years, but I think we can be really proud of our support for Ukraine. We were there first under Boris Johnson, and we've stayed the course. And I think I'm right in saying that Britain is the only major Western country where there's been no big political party opposed to the war. And the opinion polls show that if the British people had to choose between our relationship with America, or continue to invest in Ukraine, we choose Ukraine. So Keir Starmer should go to Washington, and he's actually speaking really on behalf of the whole British people. He's actually quite tough to Trump. And he's a natural mediator, I think, Keir Starmer. He's more of a bureaucrat than a sort of a punchy person. But if you're not punchy on a subject like this, when the stakes are so high, when are you ever going to get punchy? So I wish him the best, and I'm be a bit out of character, Keir, and actually really tell Trump some home truths he needs to hear. Perhaps behind closed doors. That's what Rachel's right, not to sort of make a big confrontation of it, but Trump needs to hear how angry and disappointed Europe is at what he said.
Right, I mean, talking about home truths, I mean, you have been clear that President Trump crossed the line when he called President Zelensky a dictator, but you were unhappy about the delay that Nigel Farage had in calling that out. I mean, where are you now? I mean, Nigel Farage did come out and say that he was wrong, that Zelensky wasn't a dictator, but that you shouldn't take President Trump literally at his words. I mean, are you disappointed at his stance now?
Well, my criticism of Nigel Farage was very narrow on the timing. People were all over Twitter saying, why the silence? And I thought it was very important that he get out there and say what he did. Last week, before Trump made his remarks, Farage committed reform to NATO membership for Ukraine. So reform stands absolutely sort of in the mainstream of the British response to Ukraine. We think it's right that Ukraine is supported. We don't support Trump's ridiculous attacks on Ukraine. And there was just... I was a bit annoyed at the political handling of the issue last week. That was all I was saying last week.
Bernard?
I don't want to make party political points, but Farage was miles behind the curve on on Putin some years ago, and I'm glad he's ditched his sort of pro-Putin stance.
Well, I mean, can I come in just briefly, Bernard?
What should Keir Starmer say to the president? First of all, I'm afraid he should not pick a fight with the president. He should not get into an argument about what he said yesterday or the day before yesterday was right or outrageous. He should not be there to articulate what a lot of very angry people in Europe feel about President Trump. He should do exactly the opposite. He should say, yes, you're right. We should do more for our own defence. And he should be able to demonstrate that that's what we're going to do. He should say, yes, you're right. We should try and end this war as quickly as possible. But I think he should also say that, warn Mr. Trump that he's going to go down in history as the worst president ever if he leads to more instability and possibly a wider war in Europe, which is where it's heading at the moment. I can see no path to a stable peace without the involvement of the United States in the Ukraine. I can see no path to coherently deterring Russia, except with the most emergency and draconian measures from European powers, if the Americans are not involved, as a moderating influence, but with their huge firepower to... The only thing Russia expects is power. That's the only thing Russia respects. And the other thing I would just say to him is, by the way, it took too long for America to get into the First World War. It took too long for America to get into the Second World War, despite Winston Churchill, who is on your mantelpiece over there, coming over and warning President Roosevelt, this war will come to haunt you. And it did. And this will happen again. And the final thing he should say is everything you are doing is driving Russia into the arms of... If you succeed in intimidating Russia with cutting the oil price and stuff like that, you will drive Russia into the arms of China. Is that what you want?
Right, Mike, I mean, can Keir Starmer be honest, that honest? Can he be straight talking in this meeting?
He is straight talking. He's also a statesman.
Is that the right strategy in terms of getting the outcome that he wants?
I think his approach of leading as a statesman, but also as a diplomat, is really important because, look, the defence and security of Europe is important to the whole world, and that includes the United States. And I've no doubt that Donald Trump realises that. And I expect to see Zelensky at the table of talks to bring about a peace deal, but also that underpinning of security from the United States. That's what we need to see, and that's what I hope to see.
And you expect to see that? So
that's what Keir Starmer will be pushing for. I think Donald Trump says a lot of things. We've seen that over the last, 7-8 years. But actually, he knows what's best for the United States, and the security of Europe is best for the United States.
Right, Rachel, is Mike right to be so confident?
I'm not sure that Donald Trump does know what's best for the United States, and I'm certainly not sure that his version of what's best for the United States has European security anywhere up at the top. I think it's a very difficult position for all European leaders. Keir Starmer has a bit more of an opportunity because of some of the comments that Trump has made previously about the preferring the UK's performance on things like defence spending.
So perhaps some leverage of the special relationship?
I don't think the special relationship ever really existed. I certainly don't think it exists now, beyond perhaps the fact that Trump himself has Scottish ancestry and seems to like Scotland and
£3 billion worth
the
of
royal
trade,
family. And
military intelligence sharing. We do have a special relationship, and that goes deeper than leaders, and it has done for decades.
As Sir Christopher Mayor always said, the former ambassador to Washington, it's only special if the President and the Prime Minister can together make it special. Otherwise, it's just verbiage. The word special relationship come out of American diplomats' mouths and the President's mouth, and as soon as the Prime Minister's gone, they stop saying it. I'm afraid that's been the position for a long time. We need to be very realistic about our relationship with the United States.
And I think the thing that Trump respects above anything else is one, money, and two, strength. So if the UK can show that it is increasing its defence spending, that's a point of leverage.
I think so.
But equally, if the UK can show that it doesn't need America as much perhaps as America thinks it does, because we are building on those defence relationships with Europe, with France and with Germany and with the rest of Europe, and they can show that they are negotiating with the US from a position of strength, that also increases our hand. I think going to Trump and hoping to sort of play on sentimentality and history is not going to go very far.
If I was Trump, I wouldn't believe these promises of increased defence spending by Europe, because he's heard them so many times before and they've been marginal. And the fact is that it's very easy for politicians now, at this moment of crisis, to promise this extra spending. But we all know fundamentally that the reality of politics is spending money on nurses is more politically effective.
Tim, I want to hold that thought for a moment, because we are going to come on to that probably. I mean, I want to return to something that you said previously about reform being in line with the mainstream in terms of its view towards Ukraine. I want to just play you a clip, which is from this general election campaign, Nigel Farage being asked about his views. Yeah, I think you know the one. Let's have a listen.
We've provoked this war. It's, of course, it's his fault. He's used what
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen.
Right, so I mean that's not that far off what President Trump has been saying in terms of accusing Ukraine of starting the war.
I mean, it's very different from what.
I mean, you said that your criticism of Nigel Farage was only on timings in terms of his response, but actually, I mean, his position was very clear just a few months ago, and you knew what you were getting into with reform when you joined.
I think he makes the point, which I don't agree with, that NATO moving right up to the border of Russia has intimidated Russia. What he didn't then do, though, was the next step, which Trump has taken, was to say that's adequate excuse for what Putin did. Well, so I think there is a big difference between.
And to be fair, it was the European Association Agreement with Ukraine, which was drawing Ukraine into a single security space. So Germany, having rejected NATO membership for Ukraine, then went for this EU agreement, which was going to have joint military exercises in each other's countries. It was provocative, but it certainly I wouldn't go so far as Nigel Farage.
Training exercises are simply not provocative, and what Nigel Farage said there falls well below the values of any leader. And I'm surprised that the Reform MPs aren't calling for him to go, to be quite honest. That's how disgraceful those comments are.
Look, the reality is Europe's in this mess at the moment, this position, because of crazy policies on net zero, because of weak immigration controls and failure to spend on defence. So the mainstream parties could keep attacking reform because you're frightened of reform's growth. But it's your record,
have no answers,
which you're continuing with your mad net zero policy from Ed Miliband, without adequate response to the immigration crisis, and you haven't still set out a timetable for defence. So it's scapegoating reform isn't going to work anymore.
We say a lot, but they've got no policy to back up what they're saying.
Right, I do want to get on very quickly to defence spending, but I want to just point out a couple of things, because the government today are announcing a new package of sanctions on Russia. I think we can look at a post by the Home Office saying that they are introducing new measures to block Putin's elites from entering the UK. I mean, Mike, this is a big package of sanctions, apparently, some of the most severe ones. I mean, what's the point of them when you've got the US bringing Putin to the table? I mean, why are we taking this action now, and how is that going to look to Donald Trump?
This is a continuation of sanctions against rich oligarchs that try and pollute our political system, and we're just going further with it. There is also talk of looking at the shadow fleet that the Russians are using to fund the war in Ukraine, and what more we can do around that, working with Europe. These are really effective measures that will help Ukraine in that battle that they're currently fighting.
Right. Rachel, I mean, you mentioned something, getting onto the subject of what Keir Starmer could offer Donald Trump in this meeting. I mean, you mentioned Donald Trump's Scottish heritage. There was a story today in The Sun that has talked about Donald Trump being offered a stay with the King at Balmoral. Royal Mad Donald Trump says the headline to be invited to stay with the King at Balmoral as Keir Starmer attempts to woo the new White House. Is that realistic?
I think we should be using every piece of leverage that we possibly have. We have a royal family in this country. We know that Trump is impressed by the pomp and ceremony. We know he claims to have been great friends with the late Queen. And I think what's the point of having a royal family if you don't use it for occasions like this when you want to seize attention? Now, do I think that it will have a tangible effect on the tariffs that Trump decides to put on the UK or the way that he approaches Ukraine and European security? No, probably not. But I think anything that we can do, sort of the British soft power, to make those conversations slightly easier. Yeah, give him a stay at Balmoral Castle. Give him another state visit. Invent a new honour, Order of the Scottish Thistle or something.
Something to do with golf, like that.
Something to do with golf, yeah, anything that we've got.
Anything, right, we're clutching at straws here, Bernard, Balmoral?
Anything we can do to flatter Donald Trump, we should do.
And it's not new.
Simple as that. And
US
it
President,
sounds like a great idea.
US President having some pomp and ceremony in the UK is a very normal thing to do.
Right. I mean, we've touched on this before, but I mean, one of the big topics of discussion is going to be defence spending in this conversation between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. A lot of speculation as to whether Keir Starmer is going to announce on Thursday a timetable to reach the promised 2.5% of GDP on defence. Just want to have a quick listen to Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, who was speaking to Laura Kuenssberg yesterday. She was asked whether 2.5% was enough.
2.5% is ambitious, and the last time that was achieved, of course, was under a Labour government. It is an ambitious commitment, a commitment that we made in our manifesto. We are determined to deliver, and we will set out that pathway towards it. But you will forgive me, I'm not in a position on your programme this morning to give you that information, but others will confirm what that timetable looks like.
Mike, 2.5%, she described that as ambitious. Is it really in this new reality when Trump has talked about a figure as high as 5%?
I think when we've inherited such a difficult economic picture, there's not money to throw around, and it's going to take a lot of work from Rachel and her team to make sure that we can afford to get to that point. And look, we haven't been there.
So you're not considering anything above 2.5%?
Well, look, in the manifesto it said that we're working towards 2.5%. That's all I know.
But there is a new reality now.
There is a new reality, but we have got the Defence Strategic Review to be completed soon, and that's going to tell us in detail what sort of money we need to be spending and where. Because remember, only the last review on defence said that conventional warfare is no longer a threat in Europe. Things have changed dramatically, so we need to ensure we have that resilience. We don't have it anymore. The military is down to 72,000. Last time we had it at a reasonable level was under the last Labour government at 100,000 troops. So there's a lot of work to do with the military, not just in the UK, but across the whole of Europe.
Right, but you can't yet give a timetable about when you're actually going to reach 2.5%.
Well, look,
when conditions allow is a meaningless
We will
statement.
find out more, I've no doubt, in the coming weeks from Keir Starmer and the Defence Secretary.
Right. I mean, Bernard, the Conservatives had a plan, so they said, to get to 2.5% by 2030. The money was going to come from cutting tens of thousands of civil servants. That was criticised then, including by the Institute of Government, as something that didn't add up. I mean, what is your credible plan that Kemi Badenoch says is actually on the table for Keir Starmer to pick up?
This whole debate about what percentage of GDP we should spend on defence is now irrelevant. We are now facing a national emergency. And the benchmark of success of the Defence Review, is it going to get our armed forces into a war-fighting capability within the lifetime of this Parliament? Because that's what you need if you're going to be able to provide any deterrence for attacks on our own country, our own infrastructure, our undersea cables and undersea pipelines and all that sort of thing, and to be able to provide some frontline deterrence on NATO's front line. We should spend whatever it takes.
Right.
And I don't care where the money comes from, we've got to find it.
Well, you should care where the money comes from.
We've got to find the money.
Because if you were making the decisions, you'd have to find it from somewhere. Where would it come from?
We don't have an option. And what's more, I mean, Keir Starmer has inherited this position. Let's blame all our predecessors, let's blame previous governments, but this is now irrelevant.
Can I ask Bernard a question?
Just one thing. He's going to have to mobilise the whole country, our industry, our people, to be ready to fight a war. Wars happen now between countries. They're not just something the armed forces do on their own.
Rachel, do come in here.
Well, you said that we have to find the money somehow. So my question would be, if Rachel Reeves announced that because the situation is unprecedented and we face very real security threats, that she would have to, say, increase taxes, would you expect the Conservatives to say, yes, it's a national security threat, and to back that decision and to support her in that?
It's a very good question. I wouldn't rule out hypothecated defence taxes, but we have to somehow at the same time make our economy more competitive, and the budget's been a disaster and those measures need to be reversed. I think the bulk of what we need to do has got to come out of public spending. We're a very rich country. We spend more in our public sector than we've ever spent before.
Which bit, Bernard?
Well, I mean, people have mentioned welfare and overseas aid and the Whitehall fat. We will have to cut more than that. We will have to make sacrifices. And the British people are going to have to understand, if we want the independence and freedom that our country gives us, the protection that our country gives us, and this goes for all the people who are born here, all the people that have come here. And the one other message I would give to Donald Trump,
Bernard,
very briefly, is do not underestimate this country. This country has often been underestimated before. The resolve of this country to protect itself and its own interests should never be underestimated, and we should be drawing on that strength and sentiment.
Tim?
Look, we do need to increase defence spending. We aren't spending enough, and we have to have enough defence equipment in this country. We don't have a defence industry, and we need to recognise, the threat of supersonic, hypersonic weapons, for example. But we also, I think Bernard maybe just be panicking a little bit too much. Russia isn't Nazi Germany. Russia is only 14th the size of America. It isn't actually a big economy. They're already quite exhausted by the Ukraine war. They need this war to end. They probably want to probe the Baltic states. They don't really have the capacity to go for a main NATO.
That's our security.
We have Estonia,
Poland, Latvia. That's our security.
I agree.
Are you saying that that's fine? Is this
No, of course I'm not saying that. I'm saying their capacity is limited. Don't always make partisan points. Their capacity is...
That's not partisan.
The capacity is limited, Russia has. We have to step up. But we have to recognise that Russia is not actually a very big economy, and we should be able to manage the threat without wrecking our public services.
Right, very briefly, because we're almost out of time. Mike, have we overestimated the threat from Russia? Very briefly, in about 10 seconds.
Russia has just invaded Ukraine. And I think if we have a united force to repel any future threats, then of course we'd be victorious, particularly with British military involved. Having served, I've seen that we are the best military in the world. But of course we shouldn't underestimate them. OK. We're going to have to leave it there. Many thanks indeed to all of my guests, Mike Tapp, Bernard Jenkin, Rachel Cunliffe, Tim Montgomery. That is all from us today. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on iPlayer.